The desert sun had long since dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a canvas of bruised purples and deep indigos over the Nile. The air carried a weight, a hush of centuries, as if the very sands themselves were holding their breath. Here, in this silent expanse, the echoes of a civilization long vanished whispered to anyone patient enough to listen. Temples crumbled under the relentless passage of time, their hieroglyphs faded yet still stubbornly speaking of gods and rulers who had once commanded the world. Among these relics, the name that shimmered brighter than any other, that carried both allure and fear, was Cleopatra. A queen, yes, but also a myth. Her life, her choices, her indulgences, every detail has been filtered through generations of awe and speculation. Yet even in the fragments history has spared, one question lingers: how did she live? How did she move through the opulent corridors of her palaces, the spaces where gold glimmered in the light of oil lamps, and where every ritual, every gesture, carried the weight of power and desire? It is here, in these forgotten spaces, that we begin to uncover a secret buried not just by sand, but by time itself. Beneath layers of history, beneath the decay of palatial grandeur, lay a place almost unimaginable, a bath, its surface once shimmering with gold, its walls etched with symbols meant for eyes that understood the language of divinity and ritual. The very idea seemed impossible, a sanctuary for Cleopatra, where she could immerse herself not only in water but in the embodiment of godlike indulgence. To bathe like a goddess, to immerse oneself in the warm, reflective embrace of gold and scented oils, this was no mere luxury. It was a statement, a performance, a glimpse into a world few could ever hope to enter. Yet, the mystery is in its disappearance. How could such a place, so lavish, so central to a ruler who controlled empires, simply vanish? What secrets did it contain that made it so easily forgotten, so expertly hidden beneath the surface of time? Archaeologists, with their brushes and chisels, slowly began to uncover hints of its existence. A fragment of gold here, a shard of mosaic there, inscriptions that teased a story half told. With every layer lifted, questions multiplied. Who had built this sanctuary? Was it meant solely for Cleopatra, or did others partake in rituals we can scarcely imagine? And most haunting of all, what truths about her life, her power, and the world she ruled, remain locked away, waiting for the patient and the daring to find them? As night fully descended, the first stars appeared over the Nile, each one a silent witness to the centuries of history below. The desert held its secrets close, but for those willing to trace the faintest trails left behind, whispers of opulence and mystery began to emerge. It was a world that seemed at once real and unreal, a place where history and legend intertwined, and where the promise of discovery carried with it the thrill of danger. Somewhere, beneath layers of earth and memory, the hidden bath awaited. Its gold, its secrets, its stories of a queen who lived, loved, and ruled with unmatched intensity, all lay in quiet anticipation. And as the first flicker of torchlight pierced the darkness of an excavation site, the sands themselves seemed to sigh, as if acknowledging that finally, someone was listening. Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt, has long been remembered as a figure draped in myth, her name evoking images of gold, jewels, and unmatched beauty. Yet behind the legend lies a woman of flesh and ambition, whose every choice was measured against the weight of a kingdom teetering on the edge of change. She was a sovereign navigating a world dominated by men, an empire threatened by Rome's ever-encroaching shadow, and a court where loyalty was fleeting and betrayal always close at hand. To understand her is to step into a world where the line between survival and spectacle was as fine as the gold threads in her royal garments. Cleopatra's intellect was as legendary as her allure. She spoke multiple languages, negotiated treaties with precision, and wielded her charm as both shield and sword. Yet even this formidable queen was human, susceptible to the same desires and fears that haunted those she ruled. Her daily life, as fragments of historical record suggest, was a careful choreography of politics and pleasure. Every morning, she rose in the soft glow of torches and dawn light filtering through intricately carved screens. Attendants, skilled and devoted, prepared her bath, a ritual that transcended mere hygiene. Oils infused with rare perfumes were mixed with warm water, creating a fragrant, almost intoxicating atmosphere. The scents alone told a story of power, wealth, and connection to the divine. Gold, it seems, was not simply decoration, it was a symbol of status and a reflection of the goddess she wished to embody. Cleopatra's life was a series of performances, each act carefully curated to project authority and captivate her subjects and visitors. Diplomats and ambassadors would marvel not just at her appearance, but at the spaces she inhabited, the rituals she performed, the aura she exuded. Even in these intimate, private moments, the line between the personal and the political was blurred, creating an environment charged with both tension and seduction. Yet Cleopatra's public image was carefully managed, a deliberate weaving of myth and reality. To Rome, she was a formidable opponent, a seductress capable of bending powerful men to her will. To her people, she was a goddess in human form, a queen whose beauty and intelligence mirrored the glory of Egypt itself. But the truth, as historians suggest, was more complex. Behind closed doors, she faced sleepless nights filled with anxiety over alliances, threats from ambitious courtiers, and the heavy burden of her lineage. Her choices were never without consequence, and each decision, whether to trust a confidant or forge an alliance, carried the weight of her dynasty. In her private chambers, the rituals of luxury were more than indulgence, they were a form of control, a sanctuary where she could assert her sovereignty over a world that constantly sought to undermine her. It is in these moments, glimpsed through fragments of records, that we begin to sense the humanity behind the legend. Cleopatra laughed and wept, plotted and persuaded, all while inhabiting a persona larger than life. Her fascination with baths, gold, and sensory splendor was not simply vanity, it was an extension of her understanding of power, a language she spoke fluently. To bathe like a goddess was to command attention, to project divinity, to shape perception in a way that few rulers ever could. And yet, the spaces she inhabited, the gold-plated chambers, the hidden corners of her palaces, held secrets even more tantalizing than their visible splendor. Objects and artifacts remain, whispering stories of a queen whose life was as much about survival as it was about spectacle, leaving behind traces that invite us to question what we truly know about her. The allure of Cleopatra is as much psychological as it is historical. She embodies the tension between myth and reality, luxury and strategy, sensuality and intellect. And as we peer into the remnants of her world, the faintest glimmers of gold hint at experiences lost to time, at rituals that were sacred and secret, at a life lived at the intersection of the ordinary and the extraordinary. Each artifact we uncover, each inscription we decipher, carries us closer to understanding not only who Cleopatra was but also how she shaped the world around her, and how her presence continues to captivate imaginations thousands of years later. And as the sands shift and the light of the Mediterranean sun plays across fragments of stone and gold, we are left with a lingering question: how much of what we see is legend, and how much is the raw, human truth of a woman who dared to rule like no other? The desert floor is deceptive. To the untrained eye, it seems empty, endless, and merciless, yet beneath its shifting dunes lie the echoes of an empire long forgotten. It was here, among the ruins of Alexandria's once grand palaces, that archaeologists began to notice patterns that refused to be ignored. Small fragments of mosaic glinted in the sunlight, and shards of pottery hinted at more than ordinary domestic life. But the first clue came in the form of a tiny golden fragment, no larger than a fingertip, whose edges were etched with delicate designs, a whisper of the opulence that had once filled these halls. The team, initially skeptical, soon realized that what they were uncovering was not mere decoration, but evidence of something far more extraordinary. The discovery unfolded slowly, almost painfully. Every day, the excavation required painstaking patience, brushes tracing the contours of stone, chisels prying secrets from centuries of accumulated dust. As the layers were lifted, the outlines of a space emerged that defied expectations. It was a room designed not for function, but for ritual, for display, for indulgence. The walls bore traces of gold leaf, now dulled by time yet stubbornly reflecting light in the corners where the sun struck just so. Intricate mosaics, painstakingly crafted, hinted at stories of gods, goddesses, and human ambition intertwined. And at the center of it all, a depression in the floor suggested a pool, a bath, but one unlike any that had survived from the era. The first full glimpse of the bath sent shivers through the team. Its contours were perfectly symmetrical, carved from stone with precision that spoke of skilled artisans and meticulous planning. Gold fragments clung stubbornly to its edges, catching the torchlight and reflecting it like tiny stars suspended in water. The air seemed to change around it, charged with the gravity of history. Here was a space designed not for modest cleansing, but for immersion in luxury, for the enactment of rituals meant to elevate the individual to divine status. The imagination raced. What perfumes, what oils, what ceremonies might have taken place here? The air was heavy with questions, each one more tantalizing than the last. As the team continued their excavation, inscriptions emerged, faint yet undeniably deliberate. Symbols and hieroglyphs, etched with precision, ran along the walls and edges of the bath. Scholars struggled to translate them, each new interpretation opening another layer of mystery. Some inscriptions appeared to reference deities, others hinted at protective spells, while a few seemed to be personal, almost intimate, messages, perhaps written for Cleopatra herself or for the few who might witness her rituals. Each discovery deepened the sense that this bath was not merely a symbol of wealth, but a vessel of secrecy. Every artifact, every fragment, was a message from a world lost to time, one that demanded to be understood before it slipped back into obscurity. The pool's design suggested a fusion of artistry and functionality. Channels carved into the stone indicated a sophisticated system for circulating water and oil, possibly even for maintaining a constant temperature. Gold inlays traced the edges, forming patterns that seemed to shimmer as if alive, catching the light in ways that were both hypnotic and purposeful. For the archaeologists, the bath became an obsession. Each day spent brushing away layers of sand brought them closer to imagining the queen herself stepping into this space, the scent of rare oils filling the air, gold glinting against her skin, attendants poised to serve. It was a vision both luxurious and unsettling, a reminder that power and indulgence often come with an undertone of danger. Among the treasures discovered were smaller artifacts, delicate containers, intricately engraved, that suggested the storage of perfumes, oils, or perhaps substances used in ceremonial practices. Coins from distant lands, some bearing unfamiliar markings, hinted at the reach of Cleopatra's influence and the opulence that flowed into her court. Even the smallest piece seemed to carry weight, a story embedded in gold, stone, or clay. And yet, the more they uncovered, the more elusive the truth became. Questions multiplied. Was this bath meant for private reflection, for political display, or for rituals that outsiders could scarcely comprehend? And why had it been so thoroughly hidden that centuries passed before anyone glimpsed it again? The excavation was not without its tension. The desert, though silent, seemed alive with the weight of history. Shadows lengthened across the golden fragments, as if time itself were stretching to protect its secrets. At night, the team would gather around the site, lit by lanterns, piecing together sketches and notes, attempting to reconstruct a scene that could no longer be witnessed firsthand. Every discovery sparked debates, every interpretation raised new possibilities. And beneath it all was an unspoken sense of awe, the realization that they were not merely uncovering artifacts, but stepping into a space that had once been private, sacred, and meticulously curated for a woman whose presence still resonated across centuries. Then came the first truly startling find, a small, intricately engraved container, sealed in gold, buried near the bath's edge. Its markings were unlike anything previously seen, a blend of sacred symbolism and personal iconography. It suggested intent, secrecy, and perhaps even messages meant to remain unread. The moment it was unearthed, the atmosphere shifted. The air felt heavier, charged with possibility. What did it contain? What secrets had it protected for nearly 2 millennia? And more importantly, what could it tell us about Cleopatra, the queen who bathed in gold and lived as both ruler and goddess? Every hand reached toward it with reverence, every eye lingered, and every mind raced with speculation. In that moment, the desert seemed to pause, as if acknowledging that the veil between past and present had been momentarily lifted. The hidden bath, with its gold and mysteries, had begun to reveal itself, yet it still held its deepest secrets close. The fragments of gold, the inscriptions, the bath itself, all whispered a tantalizing promise. If one had the patience, the courage, and the imagination to follow the clues, the story of a queen who lived like a goddess might finally come to light. But for now, it remained partially hidden, a riddle suspended between history and legend, waiting for those daring enough to piece it together. The bath, now partially revealed, exhaled a presence of forgotten grandeur that seemed almost tangible. Each golden shard, each carefully placed mosaic, shimmered with the residue of centuries, reflecting not just sunlight but the weight of history itself. The deeper the archaeologists delved, the more they realized that they had stumbled upon something extraordinary, a sanctuary of wealth, ritual, and secrecy, preserved in the shadows of time. But the true revelation came as the first glimpses of the bath's contents emerged, scattered like fragments of a story that had long resisted telling itself. Coins of gold and silver, minted from lands distant and foreign, lay embedded in the sediment, their surfaces etched with unfamiliar markings. They hinted at the extent of Cleopatra's influence, her reach spanning far beyond the familiar borders of Egypt. These were not mere tokens of wealth, but symbols of power, gifts from foreign emissaries, perhaps even bribes or tokens of allegiance. Each coin seemed to hum with its own history, the echoes of hands that had passed them, of promises and deals made beneath vaulted ceilings that no longer stood. Alongside these coins lay jewelry, delicate chains, rings set with gemstones that still glimmered faintly under torchlight, and bracelets intricately carved to tell silent stories. Every piece carried a signature of skill, a human touch that connected centuries of artistry to a queen whose life seemed almost mythical. Amid the wealth, scholars discovered objects that suggested more than luxury, tools and implements hinting at rituals that outsiders could barely imagine. Small containers, possibly holding scented oils or rare powders, were etched with symbols that combined the sacred and the personal. Some inscriptions appeared to invoke protection, others hinted at ceremonial significance, and a few seemed almost like notes meant for a single eye, a single mind, perhaps Cleopatra's own. As experts debated their meaning, the room seemed to pulse with anticipation. What ceremonies had taken place here? Were these items used to mark a transition, to invoke the divine, or merely to indulge the senses of a queen who had mastered the art of spectacle? Each interpretation seemed plausible, yet none could capture the full weight of the secrets contained within these golden walls. The mosaics lining the bath told stories of their own. Gods and goddesses danced across tesserae, their forms frozen in poses that seemed to pulse with life under the flicker of lanterns. Sun gods, river deities, and figures of Egyptian mythology surrounded the pool in eternal watchfulness. Scholars noted the precision, the deliberate choices in color and pattern, and began to suspect that the bath was more than a personal sanctuary, it was a stage for ritual, a space where art, devotion, and political symbolism converged. The golden tiles reflected light in ways that would have made water seem to shimmer like molten sunlight, a visual spectacle designed to awe anyone who entered. It was a performance, an assertion of divine alignment, and a reminder that Cleopatra's life was carefully orchestrated to convey both power and majesty. Yet, amidst the gleaming treasures, the bath retained an aura of secrecy, as if resisting full comprehension. One artifact, in particular, drew the attention of everyone present, a small, intricately carved box, its edges lined with gold, containing powders and tiny gemstones whose purpose remained unknown. Its placement suggested intention, almost ritualistic care, as if it had been left there for eyes that would never fully understand. The team speculated endlessly, was it a gift, a ceremonial offering, or a coded message meant for those who could interpret the queen's private symbolism? The answer remained elusive, adding another layer of tension to the unfolding narrative. Each object seemed to tease a story, a hidden logic behind its placement, demanding careful attention and interpretation. As night fell over the excavation, the site took on an otherworldly quality. Lanterns cast dancing shadows across the bath, and the golden fragments glimmered like constellations trapped in stone. The team could almost imagine Cleopatra herself stepping into the warm waters, attendants pouring scented oils, the air thick with fragrance and anticipation. It was a vision both intimate and grand, personal yet political, a queen bathed in gold, performing rituals that elevated her above mortals and drew her closer to the gods she revered. And yet, even in this imagined scene, questions lingered. Why had such a magnificent space been hidden, buried under centuries of earth? What secrets had it been meant to protect, and who had ensured that it remained unseen until now? The treasures within the bath were not merely evidence of opulence, they were clues to a mindset, a worldview, and a lifestyle that few could fully grasp. Cleopatra's life, as glimpsed through these objects, revealed her mastery over both perception and reality, her understanding that power was as much about spectacle and ritual as it was about politics and warfare. Each artifact, each coin, each mosaic tile offered a window into the interplay of beauty, authority, and mystery that defined her reign. The bath itself became more than stone and gold, it became a living narrative, a puzzle demanding to be solved, a testament to a woman whose life continues to captivate millennia after her death. And yet, for all the revelations, the bath held secrets still unrevealed. There were corners where gold glinted faintly beneath layers of debris, inscriptions partially obscured by time, and small objects whose purpose could only be guessed at. Each discovery opened new questions, deepening the suspense and compelling the archaeologists, and the audience, to push further. What else lay hidden in these waters? What messages, what rituals, what truths about Cleopatra's life and influence might yet be uncovered? The allure of the bath, its treasures, and the tantalizing possibility of forbidden knowledge ensured that curiosity would not be sated with a single discovery. The gold glimmered, the inscriptions whispered, and the room seemed to breathe with the secrets of a queen whose story was far from fully told. Even as the golden bath revealed more of its secrets, the space seemed to hum with whispers from the past. Ancient legends began to surface, some recorded in fragile papyrus fragments, others preserved through oral histories that had survived centuries of conquest and loss. Cleopatra, as both queen and goddess, had always been surrounded by rumor. Stories of her beauty, her intellect, and her power had traveled across empires, shaping perceptions long after her death. Yet the bath, with its mosaics and gold, suggested something more intimate, something deliberately hidden from public view, rituals, ceremonies, and acts that only a chosen few had witnessed. Each new discovery seemed to breathe life into these whispers, giving them form, texture, and the eerie plausibility of truth. Some legends hinted at Cleopatra's daily immersion in waters infused with rare oils and fragrances meant to enhance not only her appearance but her authority. These baths were said to be sacred, a bridge between the mortal and the divine, where the queen performed rites that elevated her status beyond that of ordinary rulers. Scholars debated the extent to which these stories were literal or metaphorical, but the presence of inscriptions, delicate containers, and traces of substances in the bath's floor suggested there was more than mere myth at work. Perhaps the rituals were intended to channel divine favor, to protect her from enemies, or to bind powerful allies in loyalty. The combination of gold, scent, and symbolism hinted at a purpose both spiritual and political, a secret world existing parallel to the public court. Other accounts hinted at the bath as a place of mystery and danger. Some papyri suggested that certain rituals required secrecy, that outsiders were strictly forbidden from entering. Servants and attendants who managed the queen's private chambers were bound by loyalty and fear, and any breach of this secrecy could have devastating consequences. The bath, it seemed, was a stage not only for luxury but for power plays, subtle manipulations, and rites that could determine the fate of those within its walls. Even the choice of materials, gold inlays, sacred inscriptions, mosaics of deities, hinted at an understanding of symbolism and psychology. Cleopatra's bath was more than indulgence, it was a calculated, almost theatrical projection of divinity and dominance. The more the archaeologists uncovered, the more they noticed that the bath had been deliberately designed to control perception. The golden tiles caught and reflected light in ways that would have made water appear almost alive, shimmering with its own inner glow. Mosaic patterns drew the eye in spirals and lines, subtly guiding attention toward sacred inscriptions or ritual objects placed at key points. The bath was a visual symphony, orchestrated to create awe, reverence, and perhaps even obedience. Every detail suggested intention, planning, and a deep understanding of human psychology, qualities that had made Cleopatra not only a figure of myth but an extraordinarily effective ruler. Yet, even with these discoveries, the bath held secrets that defied explanation. Small containers, engraved with symbols too delicate for casual interpretation, suggested substances whose purpose remains uncertain. Were they perfumes, ritual powders, or ingredients for ceremonies long forgotten? Some inscriptions hinted at protective spells, while others seemed almost like messages intended for a single observer, a personal reflection of the queen's inner life. Each new artifact deepened the sense of mystery and hinted at a narrative only partially understood. These were not merely items of luxury, they were keys to understanding the interplay between power, ritual, and secrecy in Cleopatra's life. Local legends also began to intertwine with the historical record. Villagers in nearby regions spoke of hidden chambers beneath the sand, of treasures untouched for centuries, and of sacred rituals performed by queens whose influence extended beyond their lifetimes. While many dismissed these stories as folklore, the alignment between some local accounts and the discoveries in the bath suggested that myth and history were overlapping in ways that were impossible to ignore. The bath was more than a physical space, it was a conduit through which stories, rituals, and human ambition converged, leaving behind tantalizing traces for those willing to search. The team of archaeologists approached their work with both reverence and caution. Each brushstroke, each delicate lift of sediment, was accompanied by speculation and awe. What had once been myth now revealed tangible form. Gold shimmered under torchlight, inscriptions revealed faint outlines of forgotten rites, and small artifacts suggested a narrative both personal and political. Every find carried emotional weight, and the deeper they delved, the stronger the sense that they were encountering not only a queen's indulgence but her strategy, her ambition, and perhaps her fears. At night, as the desert winds whispered across the excavation site, the bath seemed almost alive. Shadows played across the mosaics, making the figures of gods and goddesses appear to shift in the flickering light. The team imagined Cleopatra herself moving through these spaces, performing rituals that combined luxury, strategy, and devotion. There was an undeniable tension in the air, a sense that the bath was not merely a relic but a testament to human ingenuity, ambition, and secrecy. The more they uncovered, the more the space seemed to challenge their understanding of history, demanding both imagination and scholarship to fully grasp. And yet, even as these mysteries began to coalesce, more questions arose. Why had this bath been buried and forgotten? What truths about Cleopatra's reign, her inner circle, and the private practices of her court remained hidden beneath the sands? Each artifact suggested layers of meaning beyond immediate comprehension, teasing the archaeologists with glimpses of a story they could only partially reconstruct. The golden bath, with its fragrances, rituals, and secrets, had begun to speak, but it refused to tell its full tale. It was a place where history and legend intersected, where curiosity and caution intertwined, and where the whispers of the past continued to beckon the present toward revelation. The allure of mystery, of touching a life so distant yet so vividly preserved, was irresistible. The bath became a living narrative, drawing the team, and the audience, into a world both mesmerizing and unsettling. Cleopatra's story, long filtered through legend and myth, began to emerge with startling clarity, yet remained tantalizingly incomplete. Every golden shard, every mosaic, every whisper of ritual promised more discovery, more insight, and more suspense. And as the sun set beyond the desert horizon, casting its last light on the golden fragments, it was clear that the hidden bath was not merely a relic, it was a portal into the life, ambitions, and enduring mystique of a queen who had once bathed like a goddess. The excavation site pulsed with a tension that was almost tangible. Days had become a blur of heat, dust, and anticipation, each brushstroke and careful sweep of sediment revealing fragments of a story that had remained hidden for centuries. The desert itself seemed to conspire with the archaeologists, offering clues in fragments, teasing them with glimpses of gold and mosaic before retracting its secrets once again. Every uncovered shard hinted at opulence, ritual, and power, but also at danger. For beneath the grandeur of Cleopatra's bath lay layers of intrigue and human drama that mirrored the very society it once served. The excavation team was diverse, a mix of scholars, laborers, and specialists, each bringing their own expertise, and their own ambitions. Rivalries were subtle at first, manifesting as pointed comments or lingering looks, but as the finds grew more extraordinary, so did the stakes. Each discovery became a measure of prestige, a ticket to recognition in academic journals and media coverage. Yet amidst the competition, there was also camaraderie, shared wonder, and a collective obsession with unraveling the mysteries of the Golden Bath. The human element, the ambitions, jealousies, and passions, added an unexpected tension, making the process as dramatic as the artifacts themselves. The desert was unforgiving. Blistering sun scorched the team during the day, while nighttime brought chilling winds that crept through the excavation tents and rustled papers and tools. The physical challenges mirrored the intellectual ones. Ancient stonework resisted modern tools, delicate mosaics threatened to crumble under the slightest pressure, and every movement required calculation and care. One misstep could destroy centuries of history in an instant. Yet the stakes felt far higher than preservation alone. There was a growing sense that the bath contained secrets whose revelation could reshape understanding of Cleopatra's private life, and perhaps even the broader political intrigues of her era. Then came the unexpected. As the team carefully lifted a section of the bath's edge, a hidden compartment revealed itself. Stone carved with precision opened to a small, secret chamber beneath the main pool. The discovery sent a shiver through everyone present. This was no mere storage space, it was deliberately concealed, built to endure centuries without detection. The compartment contained objects unlike any previously uncovered, finely engraved vessels, coins of unrecognizable origin, and small relics whose purpose defied immediate understanding. The sense of awe was palpable, mixed with a creeping unease. What had been deliberately hidden here, and why? Speculation ran rampant. Some suggested these objects were part of a private ritual, others that they were offerings meant to invoke divine protection or power. A few dared to whisper darker possibilities, secret transactions, forbidden knowledge, even remnants of political intrigue designed to manipulate loyalty and fear. Every artifact seemed to hold a story, each story a fragment of a larger puzzle. The deeper the team dug, both literally and figuratively, the more they realized that Cleopatra's bath was not simply a site of luxury, but a nexus where power, secrecy, and human ambition collided. The human drama around the excavation intensified. Rival archaeologists, some drawn from competing universities, arrived with their own interpretations and critiques, questioning the team's methodology and vying for access to the treasures. Tensions flared during long nights of debate, punctuated by the occasional triumph as a new discovery was revealed. The stakes were no longer just academic, egos, reputations, and careers were intertwined with the very sands they were excavating. It became clear that the secrets of the bath were not merely protected by the desert, but by human jealousy and ambition, echoing the intrigues Cleopatra herself would have navigated centuries before. Among the finds were personal items that brought the queen's presence into sharp relief. Delicate containers, some still holding traces of oils, perfumes, or pigments, suggested private rituals designed to maintain both appearance and influence. Coins from distant lands hinted at diplomatic gifts or tribute, reminders of alliances both maintained and manipulated. Every piece seemed intentionally placed, part of a narrative that combined spectacle, power, and secrecy. Scholars debated whether the arrangement of artifacts was ceremonial, symbolic, or purely practical, but one thing was clear, nothing here was accidental. Every object, every shimmer of gold, told a deliberate story meant to convey both luxury and authority. Then came the human stakes. One morning, a valuable fragment, a piece of a gold mosaic depicting a divine figure, was accidentally dislodged and cracked during the careful removal process. Panic rippled through the team. The artifact was fragile, irreplaceable, and its damage represented not just a loss of material value but a potential gap in the historical narrative. The tension underscored the fragility of uncovering the past. History, once buried, can only speak when handled with both reverence and precision. The incident became a cautionary tale, a reminder that the Golden Bath was as much a test of patience and skill as it was of intellect and ambition. Yet amid these challenges, moments of discovery were breathtaking. A small chamber revealed an intricate arrangement of coins and vessels, some engraved with previously unknown symbols. The inscriptions hinted at rituals designed to invoke divine favor, to protect the queen, or to communicate messages to unseen observers. Some symbols resembled celestial alignments, suggesting a connection to astrology or sacred calendars. The team realized they were glimpsing not only Cleopatra's indulgence in luxury but her strategic genius. Every object, every ritual, every design was layered with meaning, intended to impress, protect, and control. Nightfall brought its own drama. Shadows from the lantern stretched across the excavation site, casting the bath in a flickering, almost supernatural light. The interplay of gold and darkness created a sense that the past was watching, that centuries of human ambition and ritual still lingered in the space. Conversations turned to whispers, imagination ran wild as the team speculated about secret ceremonies, forbidden knowledge, and dangers Cleopatra might have feared. The Golden Bath was no longer just an archaeological site, it had become a stage where history, myth, and human psychology converged, each discovery a heartbeat in a narrative centuries in the making. By the end of this stage of excavation, it was clear that the bath had kept its deepest secrets well. Some compartments remained untouched, inscriptions partially obscured, and artifacts whose purpose was undeciphered. Yet the revelations so far had reshaped understanding of Cleopatra's private life, a life where luxury, ritual, and strategy intertwined, where the line between spectacle and survival was razor-thin, and where every detail had been meticulously curated to convey power and mystique. The Golden Bath was no longer just a relic, it was a living testament to a queen whose influence had endured long after her death, challenging all who sought to uncover it to match her intelligence, patience, and vision. Beneath the bustling streets of modern Alexandria, hidden under layers of sand, stone, and centuries of oblivion, a secret chamber slept, untouched for nearly 2 millennia. It was a room the city had forgotten, a fragment of a world that no longer existed, and yet, in its silence, it whispered of opulence, fear, and ritual. The discovery was accidental, almost cinematic in its randomness. A team of archaeologists, scanning the shoreline with ground-penetrating radar for routine coastal erosion studies, noticed an anomaly, a dark void beneath the earth. At first, it seemed unremarkable, just another cavity in Alexandria's endlessly layered foundations. But as they began to probe, the shadows deepened, and the contours of stone walls emerged, hinting at human craftsmanship. This was no natural cave. When the team first lowered the cameras and ropes into the narrow opening, they were greeted by darkness so complete that even their powerful lights seemed hesitant, struggling to illuminate the farthest corners. The air smelled ancient, dust, clay, and something else, faint and sweet, like resin or incense burned long ago. Every surface was thick with centuries of sediment, yet beneath it, glimmering faintly, were flakes of gold. They were delicate, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable, a shimmer that caught the light in a way that spoke of deliberate decoration rather than accident. It was, in essence, a bathroom frozen in time, but unlike any the world had seen. The walls were carved from stone with the precision of master craftsmen, smoothed over countless hours, and lined with these flecks of gold and patterns that seemed symbolic rather than merely decorative. The layout was compact but purposeful, a central basin large enough for a single person, channels for water that hinted at sophisticated plumbing, and niches that may have held oils, herbs, or ceremonial objects. Everything about the space suggested privacy, reverence, and secrecy. Whoever had designed it had anticipated that this room would not simply be used, it would be sanctified. The lead archaeologist, Dr. Layla Mansour, was the first to step inside. She moved slowly, her footsteps muffled by the centuries of dust, her flashlight tracing every edge, every glint. Her colleagues watched anxiously, whispering to each other about the strange sensations the room seemed to evoke. "It feels alive," one muttered, and in a way, it did. This chamber was a time capsule, but more than that, it was a story etched in stone and gold, waiting for someone to interpret it. Dr. Mansour traced her fingers along a narrow ledge beside the basin, uncovering a faint groove that had been worn smooth by repeated use. Someone, long ago, had leaned there, perhaps in contemplation, perhaps in ritual. The gold flakes themselves were mysterious. They weren't merely decorative, they were embedded in resin, almost as if to preserve them, to ensure they would not fade or tarnish. Ancient texts had spoken of Cleopatra's baths, of luxurious pools of milk, honey, and oils, but no historical record had ever mentioned gold. And yet, here it was. The chamber seemed to breathe the legend itself, the whispers of a queen who had known the fragility of power and the intoxicating permanence of gold. As the team explored deeper, they discovered scratch marks on the interior stone door, a narrow, desperate series of lines, as if someone had tried to leave a message or claw their way to freedom. The marks were faint, almost eroded by time, but there was a pattern to them, deliberate and frantic. No one could yet say who had made them, or why. The implication was unnerving. This wasn't just a private bath. It had been a scene of tension, fear, maybe even desperation. The idea that a figure of historical legend had once moved through this very space, that her hands might have brushed these same walls, lent the room an almost unbearable weight. Tiny fragments of pottery were scattered in one corner, and faint traces of organic material, resin, oils, perhaps remnants of exotic plants, clung stubbornly to the stone. Every discovery raised more questions than answers. How had this chamber survived the cataclysms that destroyed so much of ancient Alexandria? Why had it remained hidden under layers of sediment that should have revealed it centuries earlier? And most hauntingly, why had someone gone to the trouble of sealing it so meticulously, only to leave behind those enigmatic scratch marks? The camera, lowered into the chamber by the team for the first time, captured images that seemed almost otherworldly. Gold reflected the artificial light in subtle, flickering glimmers, and the shadows cast by the basin and niches created an eerie interplay of depth and mystery. It was easy to imagine Cleopatra herself stepping into the room, trailing a gown of silk, her fingers tracing the same grooves the archaeologists were now studying, her thoughts heavy with intrigue, love, betrayal, and fear. By the time Dr. Mansour and her team exited the chamber, the sun had long dipped below the horizon. The modern city of Alexandria carried on above them, oblivious to the hidden story lying just beneath its streets. And yet, the room waited, silent and untold, holding secrets that might never be fully understood, an invitation to imagine the lives, the decisions, and the final moments of those who had walked there centuries ago. Footprints of the past lingered in gold and stone, and for those who had glimpsed them, the weight of history pressed down in ways both awe-inspiring and unnerving. The bath chamber, once concealed beneath centuries of sand and rubble, seemed almost innocent at first glance. Gold flakes shimmered faintly under the archaeologists' flashlights, and the basin's stone edges were impossibly smooth. Yet, as the team began systematic analysis, it became clear that this was no ordinary relic. Each trace of material, each layer of sediment, whispered of something far more enigmatic than a mere royal bath. Ancient Egypt had been a civilization of ritual, secrecy, and symbolism, and this room appeared to be a convergence of all three. The first samples they collected were microscopic flecks of gold embedded in the stone itself. Under magnification, the archaeologists noticed that the flakes were coated in a thin layer of resin, almost invisible to the naked eye. This wasn't decorative, it was preservative. The resin had hardened over centuries, encasing the gold in a protective shell, as if the original occupants had intended for this room to endure unchanged for millennia. Every glimmer of gold told a story, of wealth, of obsession, of a desire to leave something eternal behind. But why coated in resin? And why such meticulous care in a private bath? Next came the analysis of the liquid residues still clinging to the basin and the tiny channels leading away from it. Chemists working with the team were astonished. The residue contained traces of ancient oils, some familiar, like olive and castor, but others rare and difficult to identify. Exotic resins, herbs, and even honey had mingled in a complex solution. One compound, in particular, drew intense scrutiny, a mysterious organic extract that, according to historical pharmacology texts, was used in ritual purification and preparation of the dead for passage into the afterlife. The mixture wasn't merely luxurious. It was ceremonial, almost sacred. Cleopatra's bath, it seemed, was a space where she could cleanse herself not only of the grime of her day but perhaps of the burdens of mortality itself. As the forensic team delved deeper, they discovered minute traces of metals beyond gold. Copper and lead particles suggested the water may have carried alchemical significance or been heated in a way to produce rare chemical reactions. Some archaeologists proposed that the bath may have functioned as an early form of detoxification or even a ritualized form of self-transformation, meant to prepare Cleopatra's body and spirit for events beyond the physical world. The more they learned, the more the bath became a puzzle of function and intent. Was it purely luxurious, purely ceremonial, or a fusion of both? The chamber's architecture itself seemed to reinforce this duality. The placement of niches, the careful angling of the basin, even the curvature of the walls suggested that every element had been designed to manipulate light and shadow. During the day, sunlight filtering through small hidden openings would have struck the gold in a specific pattern, reflecting onto Cleopatra as she bathed, surrounding her in a halo of glittering light. At night, candles or oil lamps would have cast elongated shadows, creating an entirely different atmosphere, one more intimate, more mysterious. In essence, the bath had been built as a stage for transformation, both literal and symbolic. Organic residues told an even stranger story. Pollen trapped in the basin hinted at imported plants, far from Alexandria's natural flora. Some of these flowers were known for their scent, others for their medicinal properties, and a few were recorded in texts as essential for ritual purification. Traces of saffron, myrrh, and lotus were abundant. Even small fragments of crushed gemstones were discovered, possibly ground into the mixture for their supposed metaphysical properties. It was as if Cleopatra had carefully curated a bath that could appeal simultaneously to the body, the senses, and the spirit, a combination of science, superstition, and ritual magic. The most unsettling discovery came when the team analyzed the layers of sediment at the bottom of the basin. Tiny microscopic impressions suggested the presence of more than one person. Paired with the scratch marks found on the door in the previous excavation, a troubling possibility emerged. Was Cleopatra alone when she used the bath? Or did someone else enter, unbidden, carrying intentions that history had yet to record? The forensic team cross-referenced the chemical signatures, and while some traces belonged to known ancient Egyptian substances, others were anomalous, unidentifiable. Something had been added to the bath mixture that did not fit any known historical record, a possible poison, an obscure ritual ingredient, or even a preservative meant to disguise the bath's ultimate purpose. Modern forensic techniques amplified the tension further. By analyzing isotopes and microscopic residues, experts could reconstruct the likely temperature of the bath water, the sequence in which oils and herbs had been added, and even the pattern of movement within the chamber. The results were startling. The water may have been heated to a precise temperature, just warm enough to relax the body but not enough to compromise certain ritual compounds. Oils were added in a deliberate order. Every action within the chamber appeared premeditated, almost rehearsed. The forensic reconstruction suggested that Cleopatra treated her bath as a stage for a final, secret performance, a ritual whose audience, if any, was limited to those she allowed into this sacred space. The sense of anticipation among the archaeological team was palpable. Every discovery raised new questions. Was the bath a sanctuary, a tool of ritual, a mechanism of concealment, or a combination of all three? Why had it survived so perfectly, untouched for centuries? And what had actually occurred in that room, so carefully orchestrated, so meticulously preserved, that the traces left behind now hinted at something beyond ordinary understanding? The room itself seemed to resist explanation. Gold and resin, organic residues, trace metals, and exotic pollen combined to form a narrative that was tantalizingly coherent yet impossible to fully decipher. Cleopatra's bath, more than a relic, was a riddle. Every element hinted at ceremony, secrecy, and perhaps even a confrontation with mortality. It was a place where science and legend collided, a chamber that demanded both reverence and careful scrutiny. And as the team packed up their equipment at the end of the day, one thing was certain: the golden bath was not just an artifact. It was a story of power, fear, ritual, and the human desire to leave an indelible mark upon history. Among the fragments of clay and gold flakes, the team discovered something entirely unexpected: the remains of a scroll, fragile and partially disintegrated, yet unmistakably inscribed with symbols that hinted at royal significance. It was delicate work, the paper-thin layers had to be handled with surgical precision. Every brush of the archaeologist's hand risked tearing centuries of history. Yet, as they carefully unfolded the fragments, a story began to emerge, one that suggested the Golden Bath was far more than a place of ritual or luxury. It may have been the scene of a premeditated act, a private theater where Cleopatra herself had sought to orchestrate her destiny. The scroll was water-damaged, its edges crumbling, and large portions were missing, leaving only tantalizing hints of what it once contained. Written in the formal, elaborate script of the Ptolemaic court, the words spoke of purification, transition, and the delicate balance between life and death. Cleopatra, it seemed, had prepared instructions for a ritual, a meticulous set of steps intended to guide her through a passage from the corporeal world to a state beyond. It was a revelation that sent shivers through the team. The ancient queen had not left these instructions for anyone else, and yet, the fragments suggested she had anticipated being observed, or perhaps interrupted. As experts pieced together the legible sections, a chilling narrative took shape. Cleopatra had described the precise combination of oils, resins, and herbs, and the order in which each had to be added to the bath. She referenced rare ingredients meant to preserve her body and spirit, a secret recipe that blurred the lines between self-care, alchemy, and preparation for death. One passage described the sensation of immersion in the water, the way the gold flakes would refract light across the chamber, creating a luminous halo that would shield the soul from mortal distraction. The words were intimate, almost confessional, allowing the reader to step inside the queen's mind in her final moments, to feel her focus, her fear, and her unyielding control over the space she had designed so meticulously. Yet, the scroll was not merely a record of ritual. Hidden in the margins were cryptic warnings, shorthand notes that suggested tension and urgency. "If he returns," one fragment read, "the bath must not," and then the sentence abruptly ended. Who was he? What was Cleopatra trying to prevent? The incomplete line hung over the team like a shadow, a reminder that the queen's carefully crafted sanctuary may have been violated, or threatened. The ambiguity was maddening, each fragment sparking more questions than answers. The queen's words were both guide and puzzle, intimate confession and cryptic warning. As the forensic team analyzed the ink, they found traces of substances that suggested the writing itself might have had ritual significance. Certain pigments were derived from crushed minerals known for their symbolic power. Some inks contained botanical extracts that, when mixed with water, would release aromatic compounds. It was as if Cleopatra had imbued the scroll with her essence, linking it directly to the sacred bath and the ritual act itself. Reading it was no longer just an academic exercise, it became a sensory experience, connecting the past and present in ways that were deeply unsettling. The archaeologists began reconstructing the scroll fragment by fragment, but the missing sections left crucial gaps. The phrase, "the bath must not," was particularly haunting. Several theories emerged immediately. Had Cleopatra been anticipating an intruder? Had a rival, a spy, or even an ambitious servant attempted to enter her sanctuary? Or was the warning intended as a safeguard against interference by fate itself, a metaphysical caution against forces beyond her control? Each interpretation carried weight, and none could be definitively proven. The fragmentary nature of the scroll transformed it into a cinematic puzzle, a queen's last words, partially obscured by time, forcing modern observers to imagine the unseen tension that had once filled the room. Even more eerie were the indications that the scroll had been handled hurriedly, perhaps even in panic. Smudges and partial erasure suggested that Cleopatra, or someone else, had tried to correct or obscure certain lines, perhaps to protect the knowledge from falling into the wrong hands. The ritual itself, intended to be precise and private, had clearly been at risk of interruption. The room's previous scratch marks now seemed to resonate with new significance. Had someone tried to enter while the ritual was underway? Were these the "he" referenced in the incomplete warning? The connections between the scroll, the bath, and the mysterious scratch marks created a narrative web that entwined life, death, secrecy, and betrayal. As the team reconstructed the scroll, the juxtaposition of mundane and extraordinary details became apparent. Cleopatra meticulously listed the steps of her bathing ritual, the temperatures of the water, the order of oils and herbs, alongside cryptic, almost fearful notes in the margins. The mundane and the mystical collided. The queen had orchestrated every element of the experience, ensuring that her body and mind were prepared for what she believed was imminent. The scroll revealed that the golden bath was more than opulence, it was a vessel of control, a stage for her final act, and a sanctuary against an encroaching world that threatened her very existence. By the time the scroll was partially deciphered, the modern team felt an unsettling intimacy with a woman who had lived nearly 2,000 years ago. They could almost feel the weight of her presence in the chamber, the delicate tension of anticipation, the careful choreography of ritual and protection. The golden bath was no longer just an archaeological find, it was a narrative frozen in time, a story of foresight, fear, and the unyielding will of a queen who refused to surrender her agency even as the forces of history closed in around her. The final words that could be reconstructed offered both revelation and enigma. Cleopatra had planned, anticipated, and prepared, yet the warning remained unfinished. History had taken its toll, leaving a void where certainty should have been. The bath, the gold, the ritual, and the scroll combined to form a haunting tableau, a queen poised between life and death, a secret left for centuries, and a question that continues to intrigue modern observers. Who was the he? What would have happened if the instruction had been completed? And could the hidden elements of this ritual ever truly be understood, or were they meant to remain a mystery, sealed with gold and resin for eternity? The golden bath, the scratch marks, the fragments of a mysterious scroll, and the traces of ritual compounds created a web that defied simple explanation. Modern historians and archaeologists debated fiercely, each theory more tantalizing, and unsettling, than the last. Cleopatra's final act, it seemed, had been choreographed with precision, yet shrouded in uncertainty. Was it a suicide, a ritual, a murder, or even an escape? The evidence could be interpreted in multiple, conflicting ways, and each possibility carried its own dark intrigue. The first theory posited that Cleopatra had taken her own life in the golden bath, using the carefully prepared mixture of herbs, oils, and rare compounds to induce a slow, controlled death. Proponents of this explanation cited historical accounts of the queen's known pragmatism and her desire to avoid humiliation at the hands of Rome. In this view, the bath was her sanctuary, a stage upon which she could maintain agency over her body and spirit, even in the face of impending conquest. The gold flakes were not mere ornamentation, they were part of the ritual, a final act of opulence and symbolism, a shimmering testament to her power even in death. Yet the forensic evidence complicated this picture. Traces of metals in the basin, incongruent with known Egyptian bathing practices, suggested that someone else may have tampered with the mixture. The scratch marks on the door, along with the cryptic, unfinished warning in the scroll, "If he returns, the bath must not," hinted at the possibility of an intruder. Had Cleopatra anticipated interference from a rival, a spy, or an ambitious servant? Or had someone else actually entered the chamber to influence her fate? The very sanctity of the bath, carefully maintained and ritualized, may have been violated, turning what was intended as a personal sanctuary into a scene of tension and possible violence. Another theory emerged from the peculiar forensic signatures of the bath water and residue. Some researchers suggested that Cleopatra had performed a ritualized suicide that also served as a symbolic act of transformation, a staged passage into the afterlife. The presence of rare herbs and compounds, combined with the arrangement of gold flakes and the calculated heating of the water, indicated a deliberate, almost theatrical choreography. The incomplete scrollline implied that the ritual could be disrupted if a certain person, potentially an adversary, entered the chamber. In this reading, the bath was not merely a physical instrument of death but a metaphysical device, designed to control Cleopatra's passage from the mortal world in a manner that fused science, superstition, and self-determination. Yet a more provocative theory lingered in the shadows, whispered by scholars who specialized in Ptolemaic intrigue. What if Cleopatra had not died in the chamber at all? Some pointed to the faint but consistent impressions in the sediment, which suggested the presence of more than one individual. Others noted the resilience of certain chemical compounds, which could indicate that the water had been altered or removed in a way inconsistent with a simple suicide scenario. Could she have faked her death, using the bath as both sanctuary and stage to mislead Rome and safeguard her own escape? This possibility added layers of suspense and speculation, transforming the archaeological site into a theater of mystery and deception. The team even explored the notion of murder. Rome's agents, or perhaps political rivals within Alexandria, might have seized the opportunity to end Cleopatra's life in a setting where she believed herself safe. The evidence could support this theory: the unusual metal traces, the scratch marks indicating forced entry, and the presence of substances that could be lethal when combined in precise ways. Cleopatra, though a master strategist, was not invulnerable, and the Golden Bath, with all its opulence and sanctity, may have become the stage for an assassination carefully disguised as ritual or self-inflicted demise. Complicating matters further were the modern discoveries. The traces of exotic pollen and organic compounds indicated that the bath had been prepared with extraordinary care, but some elements were anomalous, ingredients that did not fit any historical record of Ptolemaic bathing practices. Could these have been deliberately introduced by someone with knowledge of Cleopatra's ritual, to sabotage, manipulate, or observe her? Archaeologists speculated on every permutation: a rival's intrusion, an unrecorded servant's betrayal, or even a late-arriving ally whose presence had gone unnoted in surviving historical accounts. Every hypothesis intertwined with both the tangible evidence and the psychological landscape of a woman under siege by politics, love, and empire. As the conspiracy web grew, so did the stakes in the narrative. The Golden Bath was more than a relic, it was a witness to events no one could fully reconstruct. Its walls, its gold, and its basin carried the imprints of intention, fear, and perhaps violence. Every scratch mark, every mineral trace, every gold flake became a clue, a piece of a puzzle that demanded interpretation. Scholars debated over minutes, hours, and the sequence of ingredients. Could Cleopatra have anticipated an intruder and designed the ritual to fail under duress? Or was the ritual inherently fragile, meant to succeed only in complete isolation? Each new interpretation only deepened the tension, reinforcing the idea that history had left a story deliberately incomplete, forcing modern observers to engage in speculation almost as an act of storytelling themselves. Then there was the anonymous warning received by the lead archaeologist months after the discovery. A single note, left without return address, simply read, "Stop digging. Some stones are better left unturned." The timing was unnerving, coinciding with the team's near-complete reconstruction of the ritual and their growing public attention. Some dismissed it as a prank, but others speculated that knowledge of the bath's significance had reached individuals who understood the symbolic or even mystical weight the chamber carried. It was a stark reminder that the fascination with Cleopatra's life, and her death, was not merely academic. It resonated with human obsession, greed, and perhaps the lingering echo of power itself. In piecing together the theories, the modern team realized that the bath's significance extended beyond the personal or ritualistic. It was a microcosm of Cleopatra's world, where politics, seduction, superstition, and strategy converged. Every decision she had made, every preparation, every ingredient added to the bath was a calculated move in a game whose outcome was uncertain, contested, and now partially lost to time. The golden bath represented both the ultimate control over her own fate and the ultimate vulnerability, for the evidence hinted that she may have been surrounded, even within her sanctuary, by forces she could not fully command. The web of conspiracy stretched in multiple directions: a calculated suicide that defied Roman capture, a ritualized passage into the afterlife designed for maximum control, a possible assassination by political rivals, or even a staged escape that defied historical record. Each theory was supported by fragments of evidence, yet contradicted by other findings. The Golden Bath became a lens through which to examine Cleopatra herself, not just as a historical figure, but as a woman navigating fear, ambition, and mortality in a city teetering on the edge of conquest. By the end of the analysis, the modern team had synthesized the evidence into a narrative that was as compelling as it was incomplete. The bath was both stage and player, witness and enigma. Cleopatra's life and final moments were encoded in gold, herbs, and resin, but the full story remained tantalizingly out of reach. The chamber, the scroll, and the traces of ritual combined to form a haunting tableau that forced viewers, scholars, and archaeologists alike to confront the impossible: that history is rarely neat, that truth is often layered with intrigue, and that sometimes the greatest mysteries are the ones left intentionally incomplete. The Golden Bath, with its shimmer of gold flakes and the faint scent of ancient oils, now stood as a silent witness to a story that had spanned centuries. For the modern archaeologists, the chamber was more than a discovery: it was a portal into Cleopatra's world, a room where power, fear, ritual, and human fragility collided in ways that defied conventional understanding. Every detail, from the precisely embedded gold to the residue of rare herbs, told a story of meticulous preparation, a life lived with intense awareness of both mortality and legacy. Yet even as the team pieced together the fragments of history, they realized that the truth would never be fully known, that Cleopatra's final act was deliberately veiled in ambiguity. Through months of careful reconstruction, they began to appreciate the bath as both a sanctuary and a stage. Cleopatra had been a master of image and influence, and her life had been defined by both public performance and private strategy. The bath was not merely a space for cleansing, it was an extension of her will, a controlled environment where she could navigate her fears and exercise the ultimate autonomy. Each oil added, each gold flake positioned, every shadow and reflection carefully considered, all became part of a deliberate choreography designed to assert mastery over a world that increasingly threatened to slip from her grasp. The forensic analysis of the bathwater, combined with the partially deciphered scroll, painted a portrait of a queen who had anticipated every eventuality. Cleopatra had considered her own death, the potential presence of intruders, and the symbolic weight of her final act. She had designed a ritual that would ensure her dignity, maintain her agency, and perhaps secure her place in history not merely as a ruler, but as a woman who faced her fate on her own terms. Yet the evidence of multiple presences in the sediment, coupled with the unfinished warning in the scroll, suggested that even her carefully controlled environment was vulnerable. Someone else may have entered, altering the outcome, or simply bearing witness to her final decisions. As the team reflected on the possible scenarios, ritualized suicide, assassination, or staged disappearance, they recognized that Cleopatra's genius lay in her ability to navigate uncertainty with grace and precision. Her bath, a seemingly private and luxurious space, became a microcosm of her life itself, a blend of beauty and danger, opulence and risk, ritual and strategy. The room was designed to protect, to prepare, and to perform, yet its very existence hinted at the fragility of human plans in the face of history's relentless march. The emotional impact on the archaeologists was profound. They were not merely uncovering artifacts, they were connecting with a woman who had lived, loved, schemed, and ultimately faced her mortality in a way that left traces still detectable centuries later. There was an intimacy in handling the bath's residues, in tracing the grooves worn into stone, in reading the fragmented scroll. Cleopatra's presence was palpable, not as legend, but as flesh, thought, and intention. The modern team felt both awe and unease. To touch her world was to encounter the power of human ambition and the poignancy of inevitable impermanence. In assembling the final narrative, the archaeologists embraced the ambiguity that had defined Cleopatra's death for millennia.